Michael Sinclair, welcome to Radio Tipping Point. Our subject today is deliberative democracy, and I'm sure this conversation will go into all different areas, and I cannot wait to see where we end up in the end of this journey, Michael. Thank you very much for joining us today. Perhaps to get us started, if you can introduce yourself and talk about your vantage point vis-a-vis the subject.
Mike, thank you very much for having me on today. I very much appreciate this. And I do hope that anyone listening to this morning will come away feeling invigorated, energized, and with a path to follow. Now, a little bit about myself. Okay, I was born in the UK. I'm a Londoner. And since 2017, I have been a member of DiEM25, which is a group within Europe that deals with democracy within Europe, and I coordinate the Deliberative Democracy Collective. Now, my background is as an artist. I went to art school, I studied sculpture, and I was quite successful. I had shows in Canada, in New York, and London. And then that transgressed to work in advertising, where I made models and props for films, television. Very lucky, a whole epoch full of big budgets and very interesting work. And when I worked in advertising, it taught me a lesson, and the lesson it taught me was to work in a non-failing environment. You were working, the advertising agencies had accounts worth tens of millions of pounds, and my part of that might have only been a few thousand. But if I mess up on my production side and they can't shoot the commercial or whatever, that agency will lose that account, tens of millions. And the advertising space has already been sold before the production happens. So the pressure of going to these meetings, but I kind of loved the pressure after a couple of years of being crucified. I loved the pressure. And it organized my mind. And then, of course, many years later, we have the referendum in the UK to leave the EU. And I'm very much a person of the world. Many friends from abroad. I've lived in Germany for many years. So when Brexit happened in 2016, I was more than dismayed. I was heartbroken. And that politicized me. That really politicized me. And I couldn't let it rest. And then I had to look at why we are where we are. What has actually happened? What are these voting systems doing for us? Are they really representing us? So I became very interested in deliberative democracy. I started to work with Rosemary Bechler, who was a founder of DiEM25. And together, Rosemary and I worked for about 5 or 6 years, interviewing people around Europe on DiEM25 TV in Canada, in Belgium, in France, in Germany, and I introduced them to our team in London. So we educated ourselves, and this is the important thing to do, is as you go through life, you educate yourself. And while you're educating yourself, please let us all leave the door open for doubt. Other opinion, things change, because this continual crusade for certitude does not serve us. Having said that, just let me give a very simple example to everyone out there of deliberation. What does that mean? Okay, listen. Supposing we've got your closest friend, a friend of the family, whoever, wants to buy a second-hand car. And 5 friends give advice to the friend in common of what they should buy, what they could look at. And on the list of what we should consider, one person in the group might say, well, listen, I think the most important thing is the make of car, the manufacturer, German, Japanese, whatever. And 3 in the group might agree on BMW. 2 in the group might agree on Toyota or something, but you might have a consensus there of 3 out of 5 or a halfway of what is of value as regards manufacture. And then we'll come to how many owners has the car had? It's always good to find a car with 1 owner, not 3 owners. So we'll deliberate. We will discuss amongst our group the importance of having a number of owners. We'll probably all agree on that, 5 out of 5. And then someone will say, but don't forget the service history. That's most important. Has the car been serviced once or twice a year, kept up to scratch? And we'll probably all agree on that. So we've got number of owners, service history, make of car. Oh, mileage. How many miles has it done? Oh my God, this car has done, hang on, this car is 3 years old. It's done 100,000 miles. No, that is deliberation. And deliberation comes from people in a selfless way who want to assist, to enable other people to achieve whatever it is they want to achieve. So it's very much, it's not so much a discussion as a conversation based on facts. And deliberation, the word deliberation is pointed. You know, it is aimed towards a result. We can have conversations about any number of things which satisfy us, but deliberation is something else, and informed deliberation is what we are talking about here today.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. I think that very often when I'm going to start with we'll go from end to beginning. You talked about this question of keeping it factually based, and I agree, of course, wholeheartedly. But there are certain problems that we have through this journey that we've taken together in the way that politics is actually viewed, to what degree there's a certain identity tied to the politics. And I personally believe that it has a lot to do with the haves and have-nots, those that have been neglected. And we don't even see in the ways that they've been neglected that we've gotten to the point of where it becomes very, very difficult to keep a conversation factually based. And so I'd be curious, from your perspective, what would be the path that we would take to get past this polarization, past this emotion-laden viewpoint, to a place where we would, in my opinion, we would be a safe space, it would be a trusted space, and that we would be able to have these factual conversations and of course the underlying trust, and respect that would be required to hold those conversations. Sorry, that was a mouthful, but I think I'd be very curious on your opinion here.
Well, I think what we would all like to see in the democracies around the world is better representation of people on all levels of society. That's what we want. And I truly believe that party politics no longer serves us. It's a broken system. It's been going on for hundreds of years. And I think people resent being used rather like chess pieces on a board every 4 to 5 years during a general election to do the government's wishes, where we select a government and the government forms a parliament, and then the populace, the voters, just disappear. We have no power over that government for the next 4 or 5 years. That's not right. That does not work. Now, I'm going to mention something here. I'll say it as simply as possible, but it's become a passion of mine. And I think I do have a point here. People think a vote comes along, they pick a party, and they vote for the party. And for us all, we believe that that is the entirety of the nature of voting, to vote for a party. Well, it is not. There is something else that happens when we vote that you cannot see. It's in the ether, it's in the atmosphere, it's in the history, it's in the culture, it's in the institutional design of your country. Because when we go to vote, simultaneously as selecting a party, you are, by your action of voting, and the word action is important here, by your action of voting, you are endorsing the political institutional design. And by doing that, you are enabling a system to remain in place, unchanged, which has remained in place unchanged for not just decades, but hundreds of years. So, unfortunately, we are almost shooting ourselves in the foot as we vote, because you may vote for a party, but the reason a left or right party, the reason nothing ever seems to radically change is because we are endorsing our institutional designs continually by the action of voting. And when I address this to my group or people, they say, so you don't want us to vote then? Well, we're very lucky to have the vote. We have a democracy. Many countries around the world don't have the vote. And well, yes, that is a simplification. Yes, many countries around the world. Leave aside Russia, China, you know, there are countries which do not have the democratic systems that we have. But we are being managed. We are being very subtly managed by our political institutional designs. And this needs to change if we want to be better represented.
I had a conversation with a representative of a youth group who promotes federalism within Europe. And we had this conversation tied to federalism on the one side and then localism on the other. And because we have been trained to think in a dualistic way, we think that it's either or, whereas in essence, we need to figure out ways to bring all of this together. And that's no easy feat. We see that there's a certain alienation that's taking place through this centralization, through this amalgamation. Obviously, the EU is very much an amalgamation, taking different cultures and even those animosities that exist within the countries and trying to come up with maybe some lowest common denominator. To what degree do you see this duopoly between the federalism and the localism as being perhaps a driver of some of these problems that we're talking about?
Well, on the one sense you could say it's a very complex issue, but it's not. It's actually very, very simple. Just before coming online this morning, I looked up Thomas Paine, born in the 1700s. Now, very interesting person, Thomas Paine, just before the American Civil War. You can look him up, everyone. He wrote a very popular political philosopher, and he wrote a book called The Rights of Man in January the 10th, 1776, and talking about all our rights as common people. This book sold 150,000 copies in the first year of print in 1776. 150,000 copies. And one of the things he mentions as a famous quote, he's talking about governments, and he's talking about people and listening to people. And he says, in every country, there is within the people a mass of common sense, which every government should tap into. And I believe that. People need listening to. They need to be able to express themselves. We need to be appreciated for who we are and not treated as polling figures. And what you're concerned with, Mike, and what I am concerned with, is enabling, first of all, an awareness amongst people that voting, we all realize, don't we? We all realize in all our democracies that, alarmingly, voting doesn't actually get us anywhere. It's not achieving anything. And like cattle, we go there every 4 years to feed on the hay, and nothing radically changes. And it makes me very angry. And it's making us all very angry, isn't it? Around the world. And we can look at the far right, we can look at the AfD, we can look at what's recently happened in Austria. We can look at the disunity in the UK. You know, I'm living in the UK. It's been an absolute nut house for 5 or 6 years, with as many different prime ministers, with a cartoon describing Downing Street as an Airbnb, a perfect stay for 6 months. And we have the elections coming up in America in November, I think November the 5th. And we see on our screens the people following Donald Trump, wearing their MAGA hats. These people are not stupid. These people are angry. These people are disenfranchised by politics and politicians, and they are angry, which is why they choose an apolitical person like Donald Trump, an angry person like Donald Trump.
That's why I love these conversations, because I don't know what's going to be coming from the other side, and it inspires me to come up with all kinds of different approaches that I wouldn't have come up with otherwise. For that, Michael, I'm very, very appreciative. And while you were talking about the calamity that is taking place in the UK over the last 5-6 years, with a whole slew of different PMs, and like it's something I've been thinking about quite often. Obviously, these political procedures, the political structures, have nothing to do with governance. It has nothing to do with supporting any type of rights, nothing to do with democracy, or very little to do with democracy. We're in full agreement here. But then what is it? It's a means of entertainment. And in fact, it was quite interesting when I listened to the debate between Harris and Trump. And if you listen to the media and the way that they described it, they had like a pregame show, and they were talking about the teams getting ready. And then, of course, you had the actual match. I'm going to call it a match on purpose, because it was a match. And then you had your post game. And so you said, well, how did the teams play? And then I really wonder, based upon everything that we talk about, everything we need to do, we're in a very critical situation where we have no time to lose, that we look at this as being the alternative. And it reminds me, perhaps you might have heard of this book from Neil Postman. It was called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I see a clear correlation in the way that politics is developed, certainly over the last 15, 20 years, and what Postman describes in his book, and where that's led us to.
Yes.
Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Mike. I did. I also watched the debate, and I came back from Berlin just in time to listen to the Democratic National Convention. And how I did it, but I spent 4.5 hours during the early hours of the morning of the week after coming back, listening to that convention. And it was pure Americanism. It was cinema. It was entertaining. And the camera was going around the crowds, and the look of passion and integration on people's faces. And I have to say, we had all the ex-presidents speaking. It was actually a trip down recent history. And I thought how I would love some of this in the UK political establishment, just some of this color. One thing I'd like to mention here, which concerns us all again, is what is right? What are the facts? How can we trust what the politicians tell us? Where do they get their facts from? Do they get their facts from the civil service? What they do in the UK. And where does the civil service get their facts from? Because let's be objective about this. There are thousands of facts. There are a garden of facts out there, a garden. And various politicians and the media push open that little gate, and they go into the garden and they cut down the facts that support their narrative and conveniently leave aside the facts that don't, which you might pick. Now, interestingly enough, we had a great philosopher here in the UK called Bertrand Russell, who died in the early 70s. And Bertrand Russell was interviewed in 1952 on a black and white BBC channel. And he was asked the question, Mr. Russell, what questions would you leave to future generations? And he said, well, there are two. One is moral and one is intellectual. And I'll leave aside the moral one. But what he was saying is, deal only with the facts. Not what you would wish the facts to be and how things might be if the facts that you wish to be were evident and acted upon. Deal only with the facts. I wish Bertrand was around now, because I'd say to him, well, just how do we do that? Because we still have to choose the facts. There is never one. And so this is part of our problem. How can we rationalize what our politicians are telling us? Because everything is chosen by them. We are given their diet. It's rather like, they like eating beefsteak every day, so we'll have that. It's very, very difficult. And as you just indicated, another very, very real problem is social media and the mainstream media. And politicians are having to, that is their voice, that is their mouthpiece. Clement Attlee, going back to 1945-48, Prime Minister and our National Health Service, might never have happened if we'd have had the social media and the mainstream news that we have these days. It has created and aided the type of politicians we have to become popularists. They have to transmute on the screen, on the television, whatever, YouTube, and I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, and that apart from the facts that we this idea of facts has become infinitely more complicated since, I would say, at least 2012, since the invention of alternative facts from Kelly and Conway, where the intention is to make blatant lies, claim them to be facts with the intention of confusing people. And of course, Donald J. Trump is the master of all that. But let's stay with this concept of the NHS and the ability to make that type of change that we need to make in our society, which requires not an immediate return, that it could take a long time. We saw the difficulties that the Obama administration had for a policy that was actually full of compromises. That would be the Obamacare, as this is often called. And when we see to what degree what the damage it did to the Democratic Party in 2010, where the party was decimated in Congress in the congressional elections, and how nobody wants to touch Obamacare today, then we see that we have a certain time period. In this particular case, I would say it took about 6 years before we started to see the actual value of what was actually decided, although there were a number of politicians who were sacrificed by following that path. And so we see the difficulties that we have in that we are not able to be brave and put out something that allows for us all to profit, in knowing full well that we need to take a medium long-term strategy with a lot of the decisions that we need to make. This can only be accomplished through consensus. We know this. This 50 plus 1 does not work. And so in your mind, Michael, how would you get us to the point of where we make decisions that are more consensus based?
Okay, I think we need to, a couple of things I'd like to mention here. We've mentioned the NHS. In a minute, I will talk about when that was initiated and how it came about and why, and the circumstances that allowed that. But I think we have to talk about voting systems and patterns. And binary voting is the evil of all voting systems. The choice of two, this or that, A or B, this good or that good, this bad, whatever. And the binary voting system is the crudest of voting systems. It is a system most easily manipulated by politicians and money, which is why we have it. That is why it exists pretty well everywhere. And we need a far more representative voting system, because it is never a choice of Mr. Brown or Mrs. Smith. It can never be that. That will never represent all of what you'd wish for the stability of our society. What we're doing here is we're just shaping parliaments and governments, not our populace. And we need to really wake up to that. Now, let me just say this. I mean, things that I muse over, but I think are interesting. Being the age I am, I can see patterns in life. I look back on life and I think, oh my God, not this again. Oh, I'm exhausted. I was here 30 years ago, mate. And wars. Let me just talk about a war. Okay, major war. After the Second World War, we had the National Health Service because After a major war, that is the time when it's very easy for a government to govern. I'm using the word easy here in the sense that no one is going to argue about the need to build houses, to build schools, to feed the people, to get the economy on the go. It's evident what you need to do after a great catastrophe, a social catastrophe. And that, interestingly enough, is a time when we come together as a society. It is after a great deluge when we all become brothers and sisters again. We all realize that our feeling of value, our feeling of peace is to live within a good society. And the feeling of sharedness that comes after a war, there is less egoism, there's less selfishness, there is more sharedness, and we had the National Health Service, a health service for all the people. And now I'm old enough to see what has happened through the decades. And what has happened through the decades, every decade, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the blah, 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 blah. We, as a country, have become more wealthy. Most countries have become more wealthy. And that's a good thing. Generally, as individuals, generally, our living standards have got better. But the train comes off the rails because as the countries become more wealthy, it's rather like bringing up children in a family and you give them too much pocket money, you know, and they go off and they don't listen to their parents anymore. This is what's happening with governments. They've become spoilt with the money that the country's making. The governments have become spoilt. The politicians have become spoilt. They've taken their eye off the ball. What they should be dealing with, us, people, our needs, housing. Ursula von der Leyen recently has created for the first time in the EU a minister for housing. The crisis of housing all around the globe, it's never been as it is for young people. The disparity of wealth, I don't think it's ever been quite well. I could go back to the 1800s in the UK, and the disparity of wealth is very, very visible there. But we have now millions and millions of billionaires around the world getting more and more wealthy. And the effect that wealth is having on governments and political parties is to our social detriment. We're going to obviously now talk about bringing people some way into their governments during a term of office. We don't want to be used as pawns on the chessboard, moved around. The government gets elected and then we're forgotten about. I think it's important as a balance within governments to have people integrated within a government. How that is done, how that is implemented, and I've had a word with members of parliament here in the UK. I've been to the House of Lords talking about this. How this is done is the issue. But all around the world, we have very interesting examples of the value of citizen participation. And what we're talking about here in citizens' assemblies is a meeting of people normally over a course of 3 or 4 days, who deliberate on a subject. They are educated about the subject upon which they deliberate. They listen to witnesses, they can call in expert witnesses, and there is a majority decision. And citizens' assemblies work very much like the judicial system, the legal judicial system in a court, where we have the jury, we have the prosecution, we have the defense, and we have the judge. And there is the use of law, and there is a majority decision. That's a simple explanation of what the Citizens' Assembly is. There is, as far as I know, only one example in the world, and it's in Belgium, where there's actually a member, an MP, that represents a Citizens' Assembly in the German-speaking part of Belgium. Okay, the Agora Party. And I interviewed the setup. I listened to how they formed their Citizens' Assembly and its functioning. It is of most value for people listening in today to look up the Agora Party in Belgium, and you can read about how they did the sortition, which is how they elect the people to sit on these assemblies, how long it takes, and they are paid while they're there. I also was very fortunate in, I think, late 2019, along with Rosemary Bechler, in interviewing on DM25 TV, Peter McLeod, who initiated probably the largest Citizens' Assembly in Canada, called MASS LBP, MASS LBP. And I'll just say what that means. Of course, MASS goes back to what I said a little bit earlier on. It's the quotation out of the book, The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine, MASS, that there is a mass of common sense that lies in every country amongst the people that must be tapped into by people, by the politicians. And LBP means led by people. So MASS LBP, Toronto, Canada. Do look this up. It's for me, it was one of the most engaging, insightful, but not only insightful, very, very creative ways of going about deliberative democracy as a business, as a paid business. We all think these things are, kind of airy-fairy liberal matters, but you can actually construct deliberative democracy into businesses, which give advice on many things. Now, what happens with MASS LBP is they have throughout the year, they send out invitations through the states in Canada of various subjects that they would like people to come into the center to deliberate on, discuss, and give their opinion. And these citizens' panels are paid for, I believe, I hope I'm not wrong in saying, by maybe an institution, a person, a business who has no more faith in market research companies, all right, that tend to just use figure work. So they pay MASS LBP as a business to bring in the citizens of Canada to deliberate on various matters. There is a majority opinion, and then, of course, that opinion is then given, typed out, written, given to the sponsor. And that's a very, very interesting way of tapping into the feelings of the public, what the public would like to see to be done. And I would wish for that to exist in many, many countries. I mean, I'm afraid we can't cover over the fact that money is so much part of everything in our lives. And you know, we shouldn't be idealists and expect that deliberative democracy, like a cloud floating through the sky, will never have any sort of fiscal dealings with anything. It will, and it's unavoidable. And I think in the way that mass LBP, please look it up, everyone. The way that mass LBP is constructed, it's very interesting. In this country, we have had numerous citizens' assemblies. In this country, we have the Sortition Foundation, which aids you with finance and aids you with the sortition, finding the people for the assembly. We had a very good assembly in a council here in the west of England, Bristol Council, which lasted for about 3 or 4 days. The Bristol Citizens Assembly, again, that's something you can look up online. It describes the sortition in detail, how much people were paid, what they were there to discuss, their findings, and more importantly, how the leader of the council took notice and the rest of the councillors in the implementation of the findings of the assembly. We also have within the UK councils which are apolitical. People have got fed up with voting right or left. And they have in Frome, in Somerset, again in the west of England, a council made up on the lines of a citizens' assembly, apolitical. So it's happening. It is happening. In Germany, which I probably have to say through its history, is very keen on democracy. We have Mehr Demokratie. And you can go to any part of Germany and Mehr Demokratie will have an office there. So Germany is very keen on harvesting the thoughts of its populace from all regions of Germany and trying to get hold of a common census. And yes, you might well say, yes, but the AfD, how come that, and what effect is that happening on the AfD? And what effect are these assemblies, which you're now talking about, having on popularism, the rise of the far right? Well, we need to integrate it with politics. This is what we need to do. And I've read Mike's paper about open spaces here, which I found very heartening. We need to, the time has gone. The time has gone to vote for a political party, a left or right. It will make no change. It'll only frustrate us. It'll disenfranchise us. It'll make us angry and disinterested. So we get low polls, or you might get a high poll when popularism comes in and people are so angry that they want to vent their anger. We really need to start to talk about integration and implementation so that we are part of a parliament during its term of office. Now, Yes, Mike, come in.
Yeah, that was a mouthful, Michael.
Yeah.
I'd like to address a few different things. First, starting with this idea of right and left. Obviously, that falls in quite well into this political system that we have, the way that parties are elected, where they are supposed to represent some standpoint. And if we agree that very often there are different viewpoints from different parts of the society who may or may not feel represented, and often enough they do not feel represented, and it has nothing to do with right or left. It has everything to do with their own personal situation, which is not being taken seriously. And we just continue down this path thinking that, well, they don't fall into this right or left category, so that means that they are irrelevant. That's what we say. We say that they are irrelevant. So moving forward, having that discussion in your mind, what would be that ideal world we have after we've reached that point of where we would be able to create it in our own image?
Well, absolutely, we need proper representation, and proper representation doesn't come from choosing a political right or left party. I'm sorry, but it doesn't, and it's very understandable. Over hundreds of years, we've had those with money and those without money. Those without it want what the others have got. What the others have got don't want to give it to you because they've got it and they want to keep it. And that's how it's gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years. I want what you've got, well, I'm not giving it you. And, we have all levels of people on various income levels in society. But it isn't just an income, money thing we're talking about. It's also an orthodoxy. There are some people, and they're mainly my generation, that want to keep things as they were. They don't want change. But what we have, Mike, is because we have party systems, they have to give themselves an identity to the people. And the only way they can give themselves an identity is by arguing with the other party, not agreeing with them. If they agreed with the other party, who would they be? Who would any party be? So what we have, the word for it is adversarial. We have adversarial politics, where we have a House of Commons here, often put up as a beacon of democracy around the world, going on for hundreds of years, where they have you have the government and the opposition facing each other in opposition, and they are in opposition. No one agrees with anyone else. And for anyone listening to a parliamentary debate, they will start taking sides. They will start taking sides. And we have something in our parliamentary parties here called whips. This goes back to, I don't know. I don't know my political history very well, probably 1700. Whips, like a whip you whip a horse with. And when there is a vote on something in Parliament, so that all the people, the MPs of a certain party, behave themselves and support their party and don't think independently, the whip comes out and interviews each of them individually and says, make sure you vote for this. You're not going to vote for that, are you? Because if you do, we are going to take the whip away from you, which means they can't actually represent themselves as an MP for some length of time, or I believe, or whatever. And it's just terrible. I can't believe that even the use, when I hear the word whip, I'm thinking, it's just loathsome. So, I do my bit. I instigated this deliberative democracy collective. We talk to our friends. We need to create a social consciousness. We need to create an awareness. We need to help people to think independently, out of the box, about why they are where they are, and come together. I mean, the energy out there, Mike, all around the globe, I don't think has ever been higher to unite us. What we're talking about in these couple of hours this morning, if you shared this, you know, in the States, in South America, in Canada, in Europe, we'd have millions agreeing. And, you know, being a member of this DiEM25 collective, they have a lot of members in Europe, thousands in Europe, mainly very young, you know, probably mainly under 40, I should think. And the one thing they are concerned with is deliberation, deliberative democracy. And I mentioned to you, there's an organization set up called the Democratic Odyssey, which is having citizens panels, citizens councils. They've just had one in Athens, and they're moving them all around Europe. Now, I don't know where or how they are financed, but that is costing money. But it's happening. It's happening. You have just got to be aware.
I need at this point to tell you some of the impetus of actually having this show, because I think you will like this. It's based upon three different components. The first one starts with empowerment, that people feel that they're empowered. That means that they have the right to determine their own destiny, that they accept themselves to a certain degree, that they just simply see themselves as being empowered. That's something that we need to bestow upon ourselves. It doesn't come from the outside. It's something that's coming from the inside. But once we have people who feel empowered, then the others are not a threat, because they already know where they stand. So when you're empowered and you meet people who perhaps have a diverse opinion, that's no longer a threat. And then you say, oh, look, they are able to come up with things that I could never do. That means that if we were to do things together, we would both benefit. And this is a mindset change that we need to have in our society, right? Once we have a group of individuals who feel empowered and see the power of having a diverse, a heterogeneous populace, and the various talents that are brought into the picture by having that heterogeneity, then you can say, if we did this together, we can make that change that we've all agreed upon. I'm just going back, Michael, to that of what you were talking about, and that view that you came to you were talking about, if we share these ideas with different regions of the world, that we would have a number of people who would agree with us. You're completely spot on this one. But what we have to do is work on the mindset and in getting people to feel empowered and to defend their rights, to think critically, and to have enough faith in themselves. That's what we need to do.
Absolutely, Mike. And I will say this. I've written countless papers about this. What we have, our political institutional designs, are a mixture of our history, our culture, and our identity. They are not going to change. What we have, the right and the left, I don't believe, is going to change. But what I'm suggesting is we can enhance and enable what we already have to be better democratically representative. We can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, I've spoken to many politicians about this. The General Attorney in the UK, Dominic Grieve, when I was speaking about citizens' assemblies. And he said, look, I don't disagree with what Michael is saying here, but I'm a little bit concerned that the democratically elected government might be usurped by what he is suggesting, some infiltration into parliament, which we're there to debate. We were elected by the people, but of course we know the party system doesn't represent us. So I would like to see, don't in life set yourself up as an opposition. The press will go for you and bring you down. We are always dealing with orthodoxy and money. Please remember that, everyone. And, you have to be very clever about this and very creative in order to make the change. And it has to happen. It has to happen gradually. And one of the main things in the language that we use, and this is where advertising taught me this very much. We can have debates and discussions and write documents that appeal to our reason, our intellects, our logic, but that doesn't work, I'm afraid. I don't think that works. I think we should be writing to our sense of injustice and anger. And this is what the press does. This is what the politicians do. They speak to our sense of injustice and anger. And that you need the morals, you need the reason there, you need that argument there. But to really bring people together, there is so much anger out there over the globe. There are so many people that wish for something different and they're not getting it and they're wondering what they can do. So how we go about doing this, it's happening. It is happening. And dare I say it, but long after I'm gone, I could almost see this political party, not the death of political parties, but a different system arising, because the systems that we have at the moment are creating real problems for us living on this planet. They have to change. And maybe we don't have a party system in a couple of 100 years' time.